It was supposed to be a routine day inside one of the most highly secured military bases in the United States. Soldiers carried out their drills, officers reviewed intelligence briefings, and commanders ensured that everything ran with the precision expected of the nation's elite forces. The air was filled with the steady hum of discipline, structure, and absolute control. But then, Donald Trump arrived. The moment his presence was announced, the usual rhythm of the base was disrupted. High-ranking officers exchanged glances, sensing that this was not just another ceremonial visit. Trump had visited military installations before, delivering speeches, shaking hands with soldiers, and discussing defense strategies. But something about this visit was different. As the gates swung open, his convoy moved through the base with a purpose that few understood. No reporters, no media coverage, just classified personnel and the leader of the free world walking into a place that had seen its fair share of historical moments, but none quite like this. The soldiers, accustomed to witnessing high-level briefings and strategic discussions, were completely unprepared for what happened next. As Trump entered the secured command center, the room fell into silence. Every individual present, battle-hardened generals, top intelligence officials, and special operations commanders, knew that what was about to unfold would be no ordinary address. He looked around the room, scanning the faces of the most decorated and experienced military personnel in the country. These were men and women who had dedicated their lives to defending the nation, individuals who had seen combat, orchestrated global operations, and dealt with threats that the public would never even know existed. They were prepared for orders that would shape national security, but they were not prepared for what Trump was about to say. And then, with his signature confidence and clarity, he gave the order. At first, there was silence. A heavy, almost unbearable tension filled the air. The officers sitting closest to him exchanged brief, uncertain glances, as if they were trying to confirm that they had heard correctly. Others sat completely still, their training preventing them from reacting too quickly. The weight of his words settled over the room like a shockwave. This was not the kind of directive they had anticipated. It was bold, unprecedented, and completely outside the realm of what anyone had expected that day. It was a command that defied conventional strategy, something that rewrote the playbook of military decision-making in real time. The shock among the soldiers was not due to fear or doubt. These were the finest military minds in the world, trained to execute orders with precision and discipline. No, their shock came from the sheer magnitude of the decision that had just been made. Trump had just altered the course of national defense in a way that no one had foreseen. In the minutes that followed, the room remained charged with tension. Some officials instinctively leaned forward, waiting for clarification, expecting the president to modify or soften the impact of his words. But he didn't. Trump stood firm, unwavering, absolutely certain of the order he had just given. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was not a carefully worded speech designed for political optics. This was a direct, strategic, and game-changing move, and it would have consequences that would ripple through the military, the intelligence community, and the geopolitical landscape for years to come. Soldiers, officers, and even the most seasoned generals in the room had no choice but to recalibrate their understanding of what had just happened. They had received orders before. They had seen leaders make difficult choices. But this was something entirely different. And in that moment, deep inside one of the most classified military installations in the world, one undeniable truth settled over every person in that room. Nothing would ever be the same again. If you believe in leadership, power, and second chances, this is the place for you. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to never miss an inspiring Trump story. At dawn, the military base was already a hive of activity. Soldiers carried out their routines with precision, early morning drills, weapons checks, and tactical briefings. Officers reviewed classified reports and commanders prepared for their usual strategic meetings. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed. The base operated with the kind of efficiency expected from one of the most elite military installations in the world. Security teams maintained their patrols, radar systems monitored surrounding airspace, and encrypted communications ensured that only those with the highest clearance knew what was happening at any given moment. But then, something changed. It started subtly. A few officers noticed shifts in protocol. Certain high-ranking officials were called into meetings earlier than expected, and the usual open flow of information suddenly became restricted. Those with experience in intelligence operations sensed it first. There was a change in the air, a quiet but undeniable tension that wasn't present the day before. At first, the lower-ranking soldiers continued their training, unaware that something unusual was brewing. They went through their drills, ran through exercises, and followed the same disciplined structure they always had. But soon, they too began to feel the weight of something unseen. Orders started arriving in a manner that felt different. The chain of command became tighter, conversations between officers became shorter, and the expressions of those in leadership shifted from focus to something else, something unreadable. Then, a coded message arrived, one that changed everything. Only a handful of individuals had access to the highest levels of security clearance. And those few suddenly found themselves called to a closed-door briefing with an urgency they had never experienced before. In a matter of minutes, the normal rhythm of the base was thrown off. Routine schedules were altered, personnel were reassigned, and whispers started circulating among the ranks. The tension in the air became palpable, a feeling that spread like an invisible force through the facility. Something big was happening. Veteran officers, the ones who had been through the most critical moments in modern military history, exchanged glances. These were men and women who had commanded forces in the most classified operations, who had seen things that the public would never know. And yet, even they could not shake the feeling that today was different. Soldiers began speculating in hushed tones. Was it an intelligence update? A new military directive? A high-profile visit? Then the rumors started. Whispers of a top-level command meeting. Something that hadn't been scheduled. A briefing so secretive that even those with decades of service had not been informed in advance. It was then that the official notice came through. The President of the United States was on his way. Donald Trump had visited military bases before. He had spoken to troops, met with generals, and reviewed defense policies countless times. But this time was different. His arrival had not been announced publicly. There were no media outlets, no ceremonial preparations, no indication that this was just another political event. This was something else entirely. The highest-ranking officers in the base stood on alert, waiting for his convoy to arrive. Security tightened at every checkpoint. Communications were monitored even more closely than usual. There was no room for error. For the first time in years, the most battle-hardened military personnel in the room felt something they rarely experienced: uncertainty, because whatever was about to happen was not in the playbook. And as the sound of approaching helicopters echoed in the distance, one thought settled in the minds of every soldier, every officer, and every strategist inside that base. Trump's order. The moment everything changed. The room was silent. The walls of the highly secured command center had witnessed countless strategic discussions, war briefings, and classified military planning sessions. But today, there was a tension unlike anything before. Every officer, every strategist, every decorated general sat motionless, their eyes fixed on the man standing at the front of the room, Donald Trump. He wasn't here for a ceremonial visit. He wasn't here for another routine briefing. This was different. From the moment he walked in, his presence commanded the attention of every high-ranking official in the room. There was no small talk, no formalities. Trump was about to make a decision that would leave a permanent mark on US military strategy. He turned his gaze toward the highest-ranking generals, men who had spent decades shaping the national defense of the United States. These were individuals who had overseen global military operations, directed classified missions, and made life-or-death decisions on a daily basis. They had been in the room for critical moments before, but none of them had expected what was about to happen. Then, with his characteristic clarity and unwavering confidence, Trump gave the order. At first, there was no reaction, just a heavy silence, a moment where the weight of his words settled over the room like a storm about to break. Some of the most experienced officers blinked, as if trying to process what they had just heard. Others exchanged quick glances, an unspoken question passing between them. Did he really just say that? Some remained composed, their training preventing them from reacting too quickly. But beneath their calm exteriors, their minds were racing. This wasn't just a shift in military policy. This was something bigger, something that had the potential to reshape the future of American defense. Trump stood firm. He had anticipated resistance. He knew that the generals in the room had spent their entire careers building strategies based on conventional doctrine. But he wasn't here to follow the old playbook. He was here to rewrite it. One officer, a veteran of multiple wars, leaned forward, his voice carefully measured. "Mr. President, are you certain?" Trump didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The weight of his certainty settled over a room. The generals, men who had led thousands into battle, saw something in his eyes that silenced any further objections. He wasn't making this decision lightly. He wasn't acting on impulse. He had thought this through. For years, military strategists had debated whether such an order would ever be given. Some believed it was inevitable. Others insisted it would be too risky, too unconventional, too disruptive to the balance of global power. But now, that debate was over. The order had been given. The officers in the room had no choice but to adapt. Plans that had been drafted for decades would now have to be revised, rewritten, and executed on an unprecedented scale. The US military was about to enter a new era, one that would catch the rest of the world completely off guard. As the realization set in, the room transformed from disbelief to a quiet, focused intensity. Orders would be relayed. New protocols would be established. The machinery of national defense was already shifting to accommodate the new directive. What had just happened was not a simple adjustment in military operations. This was a strategic overhaul, and at the center of it all stood Donald Trump, the man who had just changed everything with a single command. A charged silence filled the room. The weight of Trump's words lingered in the air like an unspoken force, pressing down on every officer, every strategist, every soldier who had just heard the order. It wasn't just another directive. It wasn't just a shift in protocol. This was a command that defied expectations, one that carried consequences no one had fully anticipated. The soldiers who had been standing in disciplined formation began to shift slightly, exchanging brief, uncertain glances. Some of them had seen combat, had faced decisions in the heat of battle that determined life and death. But this was something else entirely. Among the officers there was a moment of hesitation, not of defiance, but of sheer disbelief. Had they heard correctly? Had the President of the United States truly just ordered something that would rewrite their entire approach to military operations? One general, a man who had spent decades navigating the highest levels of military strategy, leaned slightly forward, his face betraying no emotion. His voice was controlled, steady, but edged with something just beneath the surface. Curiosity, perhaps, or the weight of realization. "Mr. President," he said carefully, measuring each word, "this is unprecedented. Are we absolutely certain that this is the right course of action?" Every eye in the room turned toward Trump. The moment demanded certainty, clarity, and Trump delivered it without hesitation. "I didn't come here to discuss what's easy," he responded, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "I came here to ensure that we do what's necessary." His words settled over the room, and something changed. Some of the younger officers, those who had trained their entire careers under traditional doctrines, were still processing what this meant. But the seasoned generals, they understood immediately. This wasn't just about shifting a strategy. This was about preparing for a future that most of the world had failed to see coming. Trump elaborated, outlining the reasoning behind his decision with the kind of confidence that left no room for doubt. He spoke of global threats that were evolving faster than outdated defense models could keep up with. He detailed the intelligence reports that had led him to this moment, the classified briefings that painted a picture of a world where only the boldest decisions would ensure the survival of American dominance. Some officers began nodding, their initial skepticism fading as the full picture came into view. This wasn't a reckless order. This was a calculated shift in power, a move that had the potential to redefine the landscape of military strength. The ripple effect was immediate. Those who had questioned the decision at first were now recalculating. This would require immediate action. Protocols would need to be adjusted. New operations would need to be put into place. This wasn't just another day in the military. This was the day that everything changed. And as the realization spread through the base, one undeniable truth remained. Trump had just altered the course of U.S. military history, and there was no turning back. The weight of the decision still lingered in the air. Every officer in the room, from the most battle-hardened generals to the sharpest intelligence analysts, was processing the gravity of what had just been ordered. This was not a routine adjustment in military operations. This was something deeper, something that would alter the foundation of America's defense strategy. But what exactly was Trump's plan? The speculation among the highest-ranking officials began immediately. Was this a full-scale military restructuring, a shift in the way wars would be fought in the future? Or was it the green light for a classified weapons test, something so advanced that it could tilt the balance of power on the global stage? What made this moment so unprecedented wasn't just the unexpected nature of Trump's command, but the timing. Intelligence reports had indicated that adversaries around the world were accelerating their military programs. New technologies were emerging, unconventional warfare was on the rise, and global tensions were reaching a boiling point. Trump wasn't a conventional politician. He had built an empire in the business world by taking calculated risks, seeing opportunities where others hesitated. And as president, his approach was no different. He didn't just want America to maintain its military dominance. He wanted to ensure that no other nation could come close to challenging it. This order, this single decision, was not about a temporary advantage. It was about reshaping the very fabric of military preparedness. The implications were staggering. If this was about testing a new weapon, it meant the U.S. had developed something that would redefine warfare itself. If this was about a restructuring of the armed forces, it meant that conventional military doctrines were about to be rewritten. And if this was about how the U.S. responded to external threats, then the world was about to witness a shift in global power dynamics that no one had predicted. Among the senior officials, some were already beginning to understand. They had seen hints of this strategy before, buried deep within classified intelligence briefings. There had been whispers of breakthroughs in military technology, rumors of unconventional defense initiatives, and signs that Trump had been planning something for months, perhaps even years. But now, there was no more speculation. The order had been given. The wheels had been set in motion. From this moment forward, the United States military was operating under a new doctrine, one that would place the country ahead of every potential threat, one that would leave adversaries scrambling to keep up, one that, in the history books, would be remembered as the moment everything changed. Trump had never been a leader who accepted limits. And on that day, inside one of the most classified military installations in the world, he made it clear that America would no longer play by the old rules. This was not just a decision, this was a declaration of superiority. Donald Trump's journey is filled with resilience, bold decisions, and unforgettable moments. Stay inspired, like this video, drop a comment below, and subscribe to be part of this movement. The decision had been made. The room that had once been filled with tension and uncertainty now shifted into something else, absolute focus. Trump's command had left no room for hesitation. The highest-ranking officers, men and women who had spent their lives preparing for critical moments, now had a directive that would rewrite military history. The chain of command moved swiftly. Orders were relayed through encrypted communications, reaching the most classified sectors of the US military. Every division, every elite unit, every intelligence officer with clearance high enough to receive the directive knew that they had just been tasked with something beyond anything they had faced before. But even as preparations began, no one was truly ready for what happened next. This was not just another strategic shift. It wasn't a minor adjustment in defense policy or a deployment of troops to a new location. It was something far greater. The very structure of military operations was about to be altered in a way that had never been attempted before. It was the moment when theory became action, when speculation became reality. As the order spread through classified channels, the highest levels of command began coordinating with branches of the government that rarely interacted with standard military operations. Top-tier cybersecurity experts, special operations teams, and military scientists were all pulled into high-priority briefings. No one had anticipated this level of mobilization. Within hours, entire protocols that had been in place for decades were rewritten. The training exercises that were scheduled for the next month, cancelled. Intelligence operations that had been running for years, redirected. The full power of the US defense apparatus was now moving in a new direction. Soldiers, accustomed to rigid structures and long-established doctrines, now found themselves executing maneuvers that had never been practiced before. There were whispers among the ranks. What exactly had changed? What had Trump seen that made him issue such a bold, irreversible command? As teams worked around the clock, new weapons, previously locked away in development phases, were suddenly being prepared for real-world implementation. Research that had been buried under layers of classification was now being accelerated at a pace that shocked even the scientists who had spent their lives working on the projects. And then came the final confirmation. The impossible was happening. The geopolitical landscape had been shifting for years, but this was a leap forward that no other country had anticipated. Trump's order had triggered a series of events that would make adversaries scramble, intelligence agencies worldwide reconsider their strategies, and global leaders question whether they were truly prepared for what was coming. The United States had just set a new course, one that would make history. Trump had never been one to follow convention. And now, as the military carried out his order with a level of precision that only a superpower could achieve, it became clear. This was no longer just a defense strategy. This was dominance in motion. The moment Trump's order was issued, a shockwave rippled through the highest levels of government. This was not just another policy shift or a minor tactical adjustment. This was a fundamental restructuring of the nation's military doctrine, and not everyone was prepared for what that meant. Inside the White House, top advisors and military analysts were immediately pulled into emergency meetings. Some of them had been part of national security discussions for years, had advised multiple administrations, and had never seen a directive like this before. The Department of Defense was divided. On one side, those who had long advocated for modernizing the military saw this as the bold move they had been waiting for. They knew that America's dominance could not be maintained by outdated strategies. They saw Trump's order as a necessary evolution, a decision that would ensure the country stayed ahead of emerging threats in an unpredictable world. But on the other side, there was resistance. Some high-ranking officials, particularly within the intelligence community, pushed back immediately. They feared that the speed of the implementation was reckless, that it would disrupt delicate diplomatic relationships, and that the world was not ready for the power shift Trump was about to create. They warned that such an aggressive move could trigger consequences that no one could fully predict. The situation escalated behind closed doors. Heated discussions erupted in classified briefings. National security officials debated whether Trump's decision was a calculated stroke of genius or a gamble that could redefine America's position in the world forever. One faction argued that the global order had changed, that old strategies no longer applied, and that waiting any longer would mean letting adversaries gain ground. They pointed to intelligence reports showing hostile nations advancing their own military programs, developing new technologies, and shifting their strategies in ways that could eventually neutralize traditional US military superiority. To them, Trump wasn't acting recklessly, he was acting preemptively. But the opposition remained strong. Some inside Washington had spent decades working within the established frameworks of diplomacy and defense. To them, this was too much, too soon. They believed the US should reinforce alliances, focus on negotiations, and maintain a careful balance rather than executing a move that would force the entire world to respond. Trump, however, was unwavering. In a closed-door meeting with his closest military advisors, he laid out his reasoning in no uncertain terms. The world was not going to wait for America to catch up. America needed to take the lead, or it would be forced to follow. His words were not up for debate. They were a declaration. Tensions continued to rise within intelligence circles. Some within the CIA and NSA suspected that Trump had access to classified reports that even they had not fully analyzed. They believed that he knew something bigger than what was being disclosed to even the highest levels of government. As the news of the decision leaked into inner political circles, it became clear that this was not just a military shift. This was a defining moment of the Trump presidency. Some members of Congress, particularly those who had long criticized Trump's unconventional leadership style, sounded the alarm. They feared that this move was part of a much larger strategy, one that could reshape the very nature of US military engagements worldwide. But others rallied behind him. Certain senators and military leaders publicly stated that Trump was doing what no other president had the courage to do, acting decisively without fear of political backlash. They saw his move as the beginning of a new era of American strength, one that would remind the world why the United States was the ultimate superpower. The battle lines were drawn. Within Washington, Trump had divided the establishment. Those who had built their careers on conventional defense strategies felt the ground shifting beneath their feet. Those who had long advocated for change saw this as the breakthrough moment they had been waiting for. But regardless of where they stood, whether in opposition or in support, one thing was clear. Trump had just made a decision. The media and public opinion, the world finds out what happened. It started as a whisper, an unconfirmed rumor circulating among political insiders, defense analysts and journalists who had sources deep inside the government. Something had happened, something big. At first, no one knew the full details. The classified nature of the order meant that only those within the highest levels of national security had access to the real story. But secrecy rarely lasts in Washington. Within hours, the first leaks appeared. A cryptic report in an independent news outlet hinted that Trump had issued a directive unlike any other in modern military history. The article lacked details, but it was enough to set the wheels in motion. The press smelled a story, and they weren't going to let it go. By the next morning, major media networks had picked up on the rumors. Unprecedented military shift, Trump's secret order, is America changing its defense strategy forever? The headlines varied in tone. Some were cautious, some were outright alarmist, and others speculated wildly about what the order could mean for the future of global security. The coverage exploded. Within hours, major news anchors were leading with segments dedicated entirely to unpacking what Trump's decision could mean for America and the world. Analysts were brought onto panels, former generals and intelligence officers were interviewed, and speculation ran rampant. Some networks downplayed the significance. They framed it as just another move by a president known for shaking things up, suggesting that it was nothing more than political posturing. They argued that whatever Trump had ordered would eventually be watered down by bureaucratic processes, but others saw it differently. A growing number of defense experts, particularly those who had worked inside classified military projects, sounded the alarm. They pointed out that the scale of movement within the Pentagon was unlike anything they had ever seen before. A former high-ranking military officer, appearing as a guest on a primetime show, put it bluntly, "This isn't just a new policy. This is a tectonic shift. Whatever Trump ordered, it's going to change the way America defends itself permanently." The internet erupted. Social media became a battlefield of speculation, theories, and arguments. Was this a sign of a new military doctrine, a classified weapons program, a preparation for something bigger? Theories ranged from the realistic to the conspiratorial. Some believed Trump was playing a long-term strategic game that only a few truly understood. At the White House, press secretaries were bombarded with questions. Reporters demanded specifics. What exactly did the president order? Is this a response to a foreign threat? Will this escalate tensions with global powers? The official responses were carefully crafted, providing just enough information to avoid a full-blown crisis, but not enough to fully satisfy the relentless curiosity of the media. In political circles, alliances began to form. Some members of Congress were quick to criticize the move, warning that such an aggressive shift in military policy could have unintended consequences. Others rallied behind Trump, insisting that he was doing exactly what needed to be done, breaking the mold, forcing change, ensuring that America remained untouchable on the world stage. Meanwhile, international leaders took notice. Allied nations privately sought clarification. Was the US preparing for a new military initiative? Was this a sign that conflicts brewing in other parts of the world were about to take a dramatic turn? Behind closed doors, diplomats scrambled to make sense of what was happening. And then came the moment that shifted everything. One of the major networks got their hands on a document, a highly classified briefing that outlined part of Trump's strategy. While most of the information was redacted, one sentence stood out, a phrase that would dominate headlines for weeks. The United States will no longer wait to respond. We will dictate the terms of engagement. The world had just been put on notice. Trump had not just altered a policy, he had announced a doctrine that signaled that America was about to operate in a way that no adversary had prepared for. Within minutes, the internet crashed under the weight of speculation. News anchors struggled to contain their excitement or their panic, depending on where they stood, because now everyone understood. Trump had just redefined America's military strategy in a way that would never be reversed. And whether the world liked it or not, everything had changed. Every great leader leaves a legacy. Be part of the conversation. Smash that like button, share your opinion in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more powerful Trump insights. The moment Trump gave the order, history had already been rewritten. What once seemed impossible, what many thought would never be attempted, had now become an undeniable reality. The United States military, the most powerful fighting force on the planet, was no longer operating under the old rules. A new doctrine had been introduced, one that would shape the future of warfare, intelligence and national security in ways no one could have predicted. At first, the impact of Trump's decision was subtle, known only to those within the highest levels of command. Adjustments were made behind the scenes, policies were rewritten, and previously classified projects received immediate funding and prioritization. What seemed like a single directive had actually set off a chain reaction, one that would extend far beyond his presidency. Defense analysts who initially dismissed the move as political posturing soon realized they had underestimated just how deeply this decision had reshaped the very foundation of U.S. military operations. In the months and years that followed, subtle but powerful shifts in America's global defense strategy became evident. For one, the presence of U.S. forces in critical regions was redefined. Bases that had long operated under traditional doctrines began implementing new strategies, ones that reflected a more aggressive, preemptive stance toward threats. The long-standing policy of waiting for provocation before responding was gradually replaced with a mindset that placed America permanently in control of global security dynamics. Behind closed doors, top military officials acknowledged that the directive had forced them to rethink everything. New divisions were created within special operations, new technologies were fast-tracked, and classified defense initiatives that had been stalled for years suddenly found themselves at the center of national security discussions. But the real change, the one that proved how deeply Trump's order had embedded itself into the core of military doctrine, came when new administrations quietly chose to uphold many of the policies set into motion by his decision. Even those who had once criticized his leadership found themselves continuing the same strategies, unable to roll back what had already been set in motion. The very architecture of America's global military presence had been redefined, and reversing it would have meant weakening U.S. dominance on the world stage, a move no commander-in-chief was willing to make. In the intelligence community, analysts tracked the long-term consequences of the shift. What they found was undeniable. Adversaries that had once tested U.S. patience were now more cautious. Global powers that had long assumed the U.S. would react within predictable constraints were now hesitant, uncertain about what a provocation might trigger. Trump's decision had done something that years of negotiations and policies had failed to accomplish. It had reintroduced the element of unpredictability, one of the most powerful strategic advantages in global military affairs. To this day, military strategists, generals, and global defense experts still debate the full impact of what Trump set in motion. Some argue that his decision forced the U.S. military to evolve faster than it ever would have under traditional leadership. Others insist that his doctrine permanently altered how America operates on the world stage, ensuring that no foreign power would ever be able to anticipate the country's next move. But one fact remains undeniable. What started as a single order became the catalyst for a new era in U.S. national security. The landscape of defense had changed forever, and those who had doubted Trump's vision at the time were now living in the very reality that he had foreseen. Because in the end, what many believed was just another bold move by a controversial leader turned out to be one of the most consequential military shifts in modern history. And whether the world accepted it or not, America was never the same again. When Donald Trump issued that order, few understood the magnitude of what had just taken place. Some dismissed it as another bold move from a leader known for shaking the status quo. Others feared it was too extreme, too disruptive to the balance of global power. But what no one could deny was the impact. An impact that would ripple through the corridors of Washington, the halls of the Pentagon, and the battlefield strategies of the U.S. military for years to come. This was not just a policy change. It was a paradigm shift. The world had grown accustomed to a predictable America, one that reacted within carefully drawn lines, one that followed diplomatic norms and bureaucratic hesitation. But Trump shattered those expectations in a single moment. He redefined the rules of engagement, forced the military to evolve, and sent a message to every adversary watching. The United States no longer waited. It dictated the terms. Some called it reckless, others called it revolutionary, but history would call it a turning point. A moment when America was forced to confront its future and take control of it before others did. And as the years passed, even those who once criticized the decision found themselves living under the very strategy Trump had put in place. Policies changed, leadership shifted, but one thing remained. The doctrine of strength he had cemented into the foundation of national security was here to stay. Because when Trump made a decision, it wasn't just for a headline. It was for history, strength, strategy, and vision. If these qualities inspire you, you're in the right place. Show your support by liking this video, commenting your thoughts, and subscribing for more.